Unspoken Issues.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Unspoken Issues Podcast. We have returned to discuss a property that I don't know a whole lot about. And I'm going to go around the horn here because we got Dean Compton sitting right over there. He's ready to talk about Judge Dredd, right, Dean Compton?
I spend a lot of time of my life ready to talk about Judge Dredd.
Only took us 81 episodes or whatever we're at now, but we're getting to it now.
Why not every episode, Jesse? You do this shit without me sometimes. You can't count this against me.
That is true. Darry waits up there. He's thinking Judge Dredd as well. He's like, man, I got to talk about this guy. So are you ready to talk some Judge Dredd tonight, Darry?
I am. I'm very excited. This is one of the first Dredd books I ever read, and I enjoyed it very much. You're
kind of like me, where I've never sat down and like dedicated to any of the solo Dredd stuff. We'll put it that way, because I have read plenty of crossovers that involve Judge Dredd, and I say plenty, probably about 2 or 3. We did Judgment on Gotham on the Source Material podcast, which was very interesting. I'm pretty sure that was a Simon Bisley doing art on that,
yeah.
And it was out of control. I love Simon's art. There was a villain in there that does nothing but headbutt things, and he has an actual dial on his forehead that he turns
I forget
up.
that guy's name. Yeah.
It was just way wacky out there. But so this one, Judge Dredd America, I assume it's you, Dean. You're the one that brought this one to our attention, right?
Oh, yeah. That's right up my alley. Judge Dredd, great character and a fun protagonist to follow. But I think, and I was talking with Darry about this before we got on, but I think in the realm of pop culture in America, and especially in comic books, we make a big mistake thinking that sometimes our protagonists are characters to be emulated and, adored and loved in a way they're not supposed to. Like, the Punisher isn't the good guy. Lobo's not the good guy. Judge Dredd is not the good guy. Mega City 1 is an incredibly fascist society where orders come from the top down and have to be obeyed, or there will be instant punitive consequences. Like, while that can make for some fun stories, you're not supposed to think Judge Dredd you are supposed to think he's cool, but you're not supposed to think this society is cool. You're not supposed to think that everything Judge Dredd does is the right thing. Yes, it's cool when he says, I am the law. That's a great fucking soundbite, but there is an implicit terror and tyranny within that statement that a judge could just decide everything that's going to happen to you right now. They don't need to hear from anybody else. There's no checks and balances. They've got the lawgiver, and so they'll give the law one way or another. It's like the cover of the first American Judge Dredd comic. It's like, he is the law, and you'd better believe it. And if you don't, he'll make you figure it out really quick. For Judge Dredd's case, it may be a little worse, because maybe some other judges, there's a little sympathy. But Judge Dredd is like a classic Dungeons & Dragons lawful neutral character. Like you mentioned the Batman Judgment on Gotham. Like, Batman's like, I'm not really trying to be here. He's like, I don't give a fuck. You're under arrest. None of that matters to me. Now, the character softened a little bit here and there, but for the most part, all Judge Dredd believes in is the law, and he is the law. And think about how terrifying that would be. Mm-hmm. In fact, think about how it's probably not terrifically different from a lot of things that happen now. And now think about how somebody's got to fight back, and you have Judge Dredd America. And you have the story, a very sad story of people who try and fight back against this tyranny and totalitarianism, and it doesn't work out well for them. But the good news is it's like Rage Against the Machine and Tool said in their collaboration, you can't kill the revolution. You can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. And people will move forward and continue to fight against this tyranny, both in our world and in Mega City 1. But in the meantime, it feels a lot more like John Cougar Mellencamp's The Authority song. I fight authority. Authority always wins.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. So, Darry, you said this is one of the first books that you've read involving Judge Dredd?
It's one of the first books he's read, period. I just thought last week.
No, I forgot about that. You just learned to read recently.
Right.
That's right.
I was like, let's start with Judge Dredd. You got to learn about the goddamn world.
What a way to bring him in.
I love British comics, but I remember reading something from Garth Ennis once where he said the only comic he wouldn't recommend to his fans is his run on Judge Dredd. Once I kind of lost that window, I was like, yeah, I don't know about this. And I always meant to go back. I always meant to read the great stuff. I'm a fan of Wagner and Mills and the others when I I do get the opportunity to read their stuff, but I don't know. This never came up, and I don't know how much of that is just like, I feel like Dredd never made the impact on this side of the Atlantic that he did in the UK. But yeah, I didn't read a lot of it, but I knew the character, I knew the premise. I'm a huge RoboCop fan, and I knew that at least part of Dredd's DNA went into that movie. So that was a lot of my context for it as well. But I enjoyed America, and to Dean's point, to Dean's many points about this, Dredd unfortunately does become more, I don't know if relevant's the right word, but like I'm reading this and this came out a very long time ago. It feels like it came out. Yeah, it feels like it came out yesterday. It feels like a book that the big two are putting out now that would just be another one on the shelf. I can't imagine what this thing looked like in 90, whenever it came out, 92.
1990, actually. Just
90.
in the 90s.
There you go.
I'm sure Jesse has the information down pat, but they actually put this in Judge Dredd magazine, which was like they were trying, which was a big deal that there was going to be like a monthly big Judge Dredd comic because in the UK, 2000 AD, where most of Judge Dredd's adventures happen, it's a weekly comic. And so and it has other things in it. Rogue Trooper being one of the big ones. There's a couple other that like I'll probably remember as we go along, but Rogue Trooper is really cool too. And you're right. A lot of shit here has taken some of that DNA. Like I tell people are like, obviously everyone knows I'm a huge Punisher fan. They're like, do you like Punisher 2099? I'm like, yeah, it's Judge Dredd light.
Yeah.
I mean, Ghost Rider 2099, which we covered, has a lot of Judge Dredd in it.
I remember.
And so, yeah, a lot of stuff. I think that's one of the reasons it never quite hit as hard here is because, like, we took, but by the time it got here, I think on a regular basis, I'm pretty sure Eagle Comics' Judge Dredd #1 is like 83. It's 4 years old, and it's already starting to seep into stuff like Escape from New York's already come out by then. Stuff like that. And then it's a niche comic. It's coming out from a smaller press here. Big deal in England, obviously, but Eagle Fleetway, doesn't have the reach here. They did a pretty good job, all things considered. Strontium Dog, that's another one from 2000 AD, I believe. Strontium Dog, but like they didn't have the reach here, so it never quite hit. For most people in America, Judge Dredd doesn't exist until the Sylvester Stallone movie,
right?
At which point there's a toy line, there's the big movie. DC actually licensed Judge Dredd at that time and put out 2 different Judge Dredd ongoings. One was like, hey, Judge Dredd, whatever. The other was Legends of the Law, in the vein of like Legends of the Dark Knight or Legends of the DC Universe, a prestige title where they'd rotate, creators. They both got over like, a fucking wet fart in church. Like nobody really cared here because the movie was a flop. But like, Judge Dredd, I feel like you're right. It's never quite hit here. He's never quite gotten over. The 2012 movie, like we're talking about, is a masterpiece. Everybody should watch that yesterday if they can. I think the reason is because, like you said, the DNA wound up in stuff like RoboCop and Punisher 2099.
It's also a hard sell. The other thing too is like, one of the reasons I think the movie didn't land as much as it did is, to your earlier point, is like you have to be comfortable with the fact that Dredd is not a heroic person. He can be a protagonist. He's actually a particularly great protagonist, but he's not heroic. And a lot
he's
of
a solid protector, provided there is a threat to Mega City 1, like I said, like aliens or the Soviet sit block or the zombies or Judge Death, who comes from another dimension where he killed everybody. All the judges like, the only way to win is to kill everyone. Yeah, then he's a good protector, but you're right. Go on. Sorry, I didn't interrupt.
No. I mean, all of those are excellent examples, and that's exactly what I mean. I feel like that's the biggest obstacle to kind of selling him to a larger thing because it doesn't fit in that black and white Americanism. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. I actually think, based on the comics that I read as a teenager, once I realized they made things other than Spider-Man, things that swore a lot, I definitely would have been. And obviously,
like when Jesse discovered Cyberforce, what a day! Impact, baby.
I still don't know Impact.
I was going to say the second biggest obstacle to Judge Dredd on this side of the pond is that a lot of the people who wound up into Judge Dredd, like the Anthrax band that like made an album about like fucking Judge Dredd and stuff, they think he's cool. They think this is something you're supposed to emulate. They don't get that a lot of this is satire. That these were things that were written because they didn't like Margaret Thatcher's like England. They didn't like totalitarianism. They didn't like violence. They were lampooning New York City contemporarily. You know what I mean? Like, so, like, this was supposed to be like, hey, you're not really supposed to, it's funny and it's cool, but you're supposed to learn different lessons. But we Americans are notorious for not getting satire, even in the days before now when there could be satire. Like, satire, I'm not sure how anybody satires anything now. You know, I mean, it's the wildest things happen all the time. You know, a governor is at war with Disney. It's weird. I think Americans here, a lot of, like 80% of the Judge Dredd fans are like, oh, he's cool and I want to be more like him. I think this is a good way to do things. What a great guy. Like, I've known a lot of Punisher fans who are like, oh, I wish the Punisher was real, cleaning up the streets. I'm like, number one, if the Punisher really lasts like 20 minutes, somebody fucking blow him away. I'm like, number two, like, what? That seems terrible. But that's what Americans do. We're not good at nuance as a society. And that's a conversation for a different podcast that's much more intellectually charged, and this one's probably going to be anyway.
It was me, the guy who probably saw Judge Dredd advertisements in comics, and that was about as far as I knew about the character until the Sylvester Stallone movie hit. And I'm pretty certain I might have been one of the ones that went to the theater to watch that. I may have been. I was just looking at the release date, 95. So yeah, it's a possibility I went.
Does anybody else mash Demolition Man and Judge Dredd together? Like, when I try and think about him, it's hard for me to sort out which happened in which movie.
That might actually be what I went to see. Because I know I went and saw Demolition Man. I'm pretty sure. That's a great movie. What do you do with the three seashells? You know, that whole thing, and the Cola War. Was it the Cola Wars or the Restaurant Wars? Which I can't remember which one they had there. The
Fast Food Wars.
Fast Food Wars, yeah. Taco Bell.
Taco Bell.
It's all right here. So
they're eating a rat burger.
I think about that scene where Sylvester Stallone looks back at the person who just handed him the food and says, "This is rat?" And she goes, "Yeah." And then he takes another bite out of it and he goes, "Yeah, this ain't that bad." And then he just wanders off. I know I say this a lot, but I think Demolition Man may be the finest film ever made. I'm putting it out there. I think it may be the finest. You want to talk about like us not getting satire? That was a movie that said this is a Sylvester Stallone action film, no questions asked, and delivered on that. But the second you start watching it, you're like, oh, this is about us as a society, and has become as relevant, if not more relevant, than Judge Dredd in the ensuing years. Plus, Wesley Snipes as Simon Phoenix.
Oh, yeah.
I do not understand how he did not win the Academy Award for Best Actor for whatever he is doing while he is on screen for 2 hours, because it is flawless.
I just want to say, I think the only thing it got wrong is like, wow, man, those cops don't do anything, and our cops only do bad things.
Sure.
Like they're like, hey, we don't have any guns. Like, our cops are wearing like fucking War Machine armor now.
Yeah.
Judge Dredd America. Yeah, John Wagner is a writer. He is a writer, and he's also the writer of Judge Dredd America. Artist Colin McNeil come together here on this piece. Just as Dean had said, this released in 1990 through the, what'd you say? It was Judge Dredd magazine, right?
Magazine.
Yeah. As you said, it was a weekly comic. I was looking at the issue numbers. It said 101 to 107. So I don't know if that means January. I have no idea. When I say, I mean 1.01.
I'm going to be honest with you. Like, the British numbering shit, like, it gets, they're like, oh, it's 2000 AD, Prague 4117. Like, I don't know what that means. I'll just read it, you know, and I'm in a 2000 AD group, and I'm just too scared to ask. Because they'll be like, oh, look at this fucking limey ass noob, you know, or what the fuck ever, you know, goddamn piece of shit. You don't even know anything. But I know strontium, dog.
Yes, you do.
Give me something.
This is 1990 when this thing releases. I mean, just when we get into the synopsis of this thing, it is amazing that this is something that was written in 90 and how it really kind of reflects what society is going through right now. So let's go ahead. I'll get into the synopsis here, and then I've got some questions. You guys chime in with your notes, whatever. We'll do it the same old.
Well, if there's anything that we learned from this, you have questions, but I don't know if there are any answers.
You know? Right. So our story tells the tale of two childhood friends, America Jara and Bennett Beeny, growing up together and growing apart. First is America, given the name by her father as he believed the United States held so much promise for his family. However, she grows to despise the fascist way the judges now rule the United States, finding a voice to try and speak out against them, allying herself with the Democrats and a band of extremists called Total War. Beeny, on the other hand, looks to conform, becoming a singer, but also falling in love with America. Seeing the troublesome path that America seemed destined to be on. Boy, you could just interchange almost like the character versus the actual America. Seeing the troublesome path that America seemed destined to be on, Beeny leaves to focus on his career. However, his love for America never waned until he began to look for her again, stumbling upon her in a seedy part of town. When Beeny approaches her, he soon finds out that she is part of a planned judge ambush, where she and another kill 2 responding judges. America's associate then turns his gun on Beeny, shooting him in the throat, nearly killing him. As America escapes, Beeny is taken to the hospital where he continues to protect America as he lies to the judge about what happened. Sometime later, a recovering Beeny, who will never sing again, has a visitor at his house. It is an apologetic America begging for his forgiveness. America stays the night with Beeny and the next morning asks him for a large amount of money. Fearing what the money will be used for, Beeny agrees, but this time calls the judges after he finds out she and her organization plan to blow up the Statue of Liberty. As America and others drive into the setup, the judges unleash a barrage of gunfire into their vehicles. Beeny watches in horror as America, riddled with bullets, drags a United States flag to the foot of the statue and collapses in his arms, alive but brain dead. Mourning what happened to America, we close the book showing Beeny has begun singing again, but has put his brain into America's body, sharing her song with anyone that will listen. So that is our synopsis on a very, very powerful book. Let me just ask a question. What's John Wagner saying here?
Well, I mean, I know if you read interviews, one of the things that they wanted to start Magazine off with a bang. One of the things that apparently he wanted to get across from this story is like what it would be like to live in Mega City 1, because like I said, a lot of fantastical things happen in Mega City 1. Like she says at one point, she's like, we can fly to the stars. We've made super robots. We've done all kinds of things. We could govern ourselves, surely. So he wanted to show what the life would be like in the incredibly overpopulated, incredibly crime-ridden, incredibly totalitarian world of Mega City 1, which is what America has. You know, at one point, Judge Dredd even tells him, like, kid, this isn't America. This is Mega City 1, and you and your dad have a lot to learn. So I think that's what he was trying to get across. He was trying to reinforce that Judge Dredd is not the good guy in some cases, and that Mega City 1 is probably not a great place to live, even if you're not one of those people who are all hopped up on slow-mo or who have the dial in their head so they can headbutt people stronger.
One of the things that stuck out at me when I'm reading this book, it's the overall decreased value of life and just utter lack of sympathy that the judges have.
Right, because that's what you would have. You have a guy who they are the law. But
right.
There's not really an appeals process. It's funny, in Mega City 2, they're like lawyers, and they're judges, but it's a lot different. But in Mega City 1, no, that's it. I am the law. And they wanted to show you, John Wagner, and the artist too, God, I can't remember his name, McNeil, because the art reinforces this is a dark place ran by dark people who believe whatever they do, the ends justify the means. Like Judge Dredd's telling you that at the beginning. He's like, listen, I'm all for rights, but not at the expense of order. You know, and I'm willing to terrorize children to make them act right. There's another Judge Dredd comic where he's like, he's like, listen, in a lot of ways, dead bodies are the best citizen. They're quiet. They don't move around. They don't cause any trouble. Okay. And again, Judge Dredd is softened about some things. Like he thinks mutants should have rights now, which is something that he didn't used to think. Also, it's important to note that these events all happen in real time. Like Judge Dredd is now like 200 or something because they can just rejuvenate themselves. So like, I mean, not real time, but it has been, I guess Judge Dredd first appeared around like 42 years ago. There's like at least 30 years have passed in that time, like in the Mega City world. So yeah, I mean, I just think that like it's supposed to reinforce that like there is an inherent fear in giving up all of your rights so that somebody can guide you along, because what happens when the person who guides you along doesn't ever want you to participate again? They're the law. What are you going to do about it? They can just kill you if they feel like it. What are you going to do about it? It's a question that we ask all the time now, particularly if you're a minority.
You mentioned the art, and I did have some notes on the art here. I put in here that Colin's art can be striking, beautiful, and brutal. There's a few pages that I noted here. The page where it's just a judge and a young boy who dropped the ice cream cone. That's all you see. Yeah. There's no background. It's just a white background. The ice cream cone is on the ground and the judge is like towering over the kid. That's a great page. There's a splash page of the war that's going on, or that went on, and it's amazing. And then the pages where Benny gets shot. You talk about brutal.
Yeah.
He gets shot in the throat, and it is something else.
I find the art here to be hauntingly impactful, is the way I put it. Like, there's a lot of impact, but there's almost like it almost hangs in the air. Like, everything that's done, like, you can feel it. Like, there's this almost gothic hauntingness. I know that's weird to say about, obviously, a very technologically advanced thing, but, like, it just, you can just feel, like, it feels like Frankenstein in a lot of ways. You're like, oh, man, nothing good's going to happen today. It doesn't matter if the little girl shows up with the flower or not. This is not going to
It ain't going to end well. No.
I don't care how bright that sun's shining. This is wrong.
Well, I like that the story works on two levels. It's both about the society of Mega City 1, which is in America, especially as viewed by, Brits in the 80s. But it's also about the very personal relationship between Benny and America. And, one parallels the other. Benny keeps dedicating himself to his America and has nothing good to show for it. So it works on the microcosm level as well. I liked Benny a lot as a protagonist because he bucks the trend. One thing that I didn't really think of in Judge Dredd, I kind of think of Mega City 1 as like this destitute place. But Benny is actually able to live a pretty comfortable life. People still
got a goddamn
want
garden.
Yeah, exactly.
With real plants.
All of that surprised me. Going back to 80s movies, it was a very Blade Runner thing where like, oh no, the wealthy are still the wealthy. And if you have something that society values, you can become wealthy too. You just, you have to luck out. In Benny's case, people still like music. So I like the fact that he was one of the infinitesimally few people who actually could be very happy in Mega City. And he isn't because of his dedication to his version of America. And I did like the fact that, you see him as kind of an addict. And I feel like a lot of people are like that in real life and probably were back then, where it's like, well, how dedicated to this idea do you have to be to ignore all of its flaws? And for Benny, it's losing pretty much everything before he gets to that point. And Benny's got a lot to lose. So I really did enjoy that arc. I thought that was great. I love the way it ends. I think that's an incredibly poignant moment where that was the only way he could do the one thing that he claimed he wanted to, which was sing. So I thought that was very well done. And again, I do wish that this were released, more often. I wish this were, I don't even know who would have the licensing rights, but Image or someone who could put this on the stands. I really do think that a lot of people would enjoy this if they read it today.
I mean, it's in print. You can just buy it. I think it's 2000 AD does their own stuff now, like, according to this. Like, I just bought this like 2 years ago.
No, okay. I know, but I guess my point is like, I go to the comic book store every week, right? I don't ever see 2018. They're really big across the pond. I visited once and I went to Forbidden Planet and they're there and they're great and they got a bunch of good stuff. And don't get me wrong, I got the collections of all the Future Shocks by Moore and Morrison and all those guys, but for the most part, the warriors that go every week to pick up the copies of 2000 AD, I feel like that doesn't necessarily translate to America, which is a shame.
Not translate here. No, not at all.
No.
And I was going to say, though, you're like, I go to the comic book store every week, and I'm not seeing this or that. It's up to you to talk to your local comic book store owner and say, these are the things I want to see, so they can order them for you. There's a book called Previews, right? And like... Right?
Oh man!
Thanks, Dean.
Is 2080 in previews? I'm not even.
It used to be when
that's gotta be. Come on,
it's
an international book. Why necessarily would it be? I don't know.
It's gotta be.
Back in the day, the American side, it was Eagle Comics and then Fleetway Quality released them here.
Yeah.
That's
But
like
those
monthly.
companies
I
are
don't
all
know if they're
closed,
still released here or not.
Okay.
I want to say
Good point.
IDW's released some Judge Dredd stuff in the last few years, but I couldn't
Oh,
say for sure.
Well, that's my point. Is like at the end of the day, it is a licensing agreement. I mean, I hate to say it, it's the same thing. Like when Alan Moore makes a new comic, God only knows what company's going to put it out over here. You know, it's kind of the same thing. It's not like you're getting Judge Dredd alongside Spider-Man or Superman or something else. But yeah, you're also getting comparatively less product, right? But even if it is still good. But,
and even when like Fleetway Quality and Eagle put it out, they put it out monthly. Like they didn't try and sell people on the weekly here. You know, it's just not going to work.
Well, it's just not. Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's not the way we buy things, but at the same time, it allows them to make a little bit more money because the price of a monthly comic is a hell of a lot higher than the price of a weekly comic. So I mean,
you know what's weird though? We talk about it. We're like, oh, we don't really buy comics weekly. The fuck we don't. People go every Wednesday to goddamn buy comic books.
No, that's not what I meant. We do.
No. I'm just saying. I'm saying it's so weird that we can't tie those two things together because people already go every week. Why wouldn't they pick one up every week?
Why wouldn't they publish one?
It's interesting they can't be tied together because when people say, oh, we don't buy comics weekly here, we absolutely do. We don't buy weekly periodicals here, weekly comic books. And I think it's interesting that we can't marry those two habits. You'd think it would be easier.
Right.
I think the last time somebody tried, I know, didn't DC try and do Wednesday comics around like 12 years ago or something? Yeah. On like newsprint. That's the last time I can think a major company did it, right?
But that's, you just hit the nail on the head because that's the problem. The people who go every week, they're keeping these things and they're keeping them in pristine condition. 2000 AD is sold on the magazine racks next to the newspaper and everything else. Like, I think part of the problem is if you go to your LCS every week and you buy a copy of Judge Dredd or 2000 AD or whatever else, you're going to be like, okay, great. Now I got to store this thing until the sun burns out. And the same thing with Wednesday Comics. Wednesday Comics was sold as a newspaper. It was sold almost to be disposable.
Right.
And I know that I was a collector at the time, and I know friends that were collectors were like, well, how do I store this? Where does it go? It doesn't fit. Like the American comic book industry is smaller than the European and certainly the Far East Asian one because we get hung up on this nonsense. Like I completely switched to digital. When I go to my local comic book store, it's just to get stuff that I want to have on a bookshelf. But the bulk of my reading is done digitally. For me. Yeah, exactly. I also like going to the local comic book store. I don't know about you guys, but at this point in my life, it's like the one break where I go in and I'm like, give me everything on that wall. I do not care. Just please talk to me about something that isn't work, the news, or my family.
I finally quit buying Punisher, so that was my last comic book that I was buying. Well, I mean, I have like every Punisher issue from like the first one until now. So
I couldn't do it. I had to drop it. I couldn't.
Yeah, I just dropped it. So that was my last one as far as like I got it all the time. Now I buy Epic collections and I buy toys and I'll get like a one shot that catches my eye or a key issue that I like. But like, no, I don't. When I go, I don't pick up like I'm like I don't have a folder or shit anymore. Yeah.
If anyone is listening to this and they're wondering what they should get, Ahoy Comics is a small publisher out of upstate New York. Their comics are all hilarious, very, very funny.
Baby.
Tom Pyre used to work at DC, great creator, great editor. But my point was they give you a lot of back matter. They give short stories. They give art. They give full page. Like if you drop a couple of bucks on anything that says Ahoy Comics, you are not going to feel like you wasted your money. I cannot say that on anything coming out from the big two. Like if you're just looking for something random, go in, ask your person, be like, hey, do you have anything from Ahoy? It's probably going to be good. It's going to be worth your money. And if you like it, there'll be another one next month.
What you should do, Jesse, is every time he said Ahoy Comics, like beep it out and be like, they didn't pay us. I can't put that in here, man. Product placement, you know what I mean? I've liked what I've read from Ahoy Comics. It's not very much, but Tom Pyre and I are like friends on Facebook, and we talk on Twitter sometimes. It's funny. Fun guy, and he's a great creator. That we should talk about Our Man sometime. He did a really great job.
I suggest, I absolutely. I love his Our Man book, and I always tell people, I'm like, you probably haven't read it, but you're missing out. It's a damn fine book. It takes a giant, ridiculous Grant Morrison concept, makes it incredibly relatable, and it's easily the best Snapper Car story ever told.
Well, that's not a high bar to come.
It's not a high bar.
Unlike Total War, they have a high bar to jump to try and get back democracy.
Darry was talking about the relationship between America and Bennett or Beeny. I'm sure we've all had those relationships in the past where you can kind of see somebody going down a dark path. Now, granted, her path may have been justified, obviously, in her eyes as to what she was doing, but it was going to be a violent path. It was going to be one filled with a lot of strife and dangerous to her.
Stan, you're right, but remember, they tried to do it peacefully and the judges fucked it up because the judges didn't want to concede any power. So it didn't necessarily have to be that violent. The judges wanted violence. It's like Allen Ginsberg says it had to be playing on the jukebox. It was a group of people. They wanted Attica. They wanted Kent State. They wanted it. They wanted the war in Vietnam. They wanted this because it gives them a pretense to engage in further curtailment of civil liberties and social justice.
Could you imagine the one person who listens to this podcast because they like Judge Dredd and they hear you go on about Allen Ginsberg and they're like, oh shit, this is not what I expected. Don't get me wrong. We all go on and on about Marvel 2099 and the other ephemera, but you want to have, a deep dive conversation about the erosion of civil liberties. Dean Compton's your man.
This goes all the way back to when they were kids. He could see that she was obviously going towards something that was probably going to buck the system. Is probably the best way to put it. I was going to say
there's a lot of danger involved, but the violence didn't have to be as violent as it was.
I'll agree with that.
Brought that on themselves.
I'll agree to that with that to an extent. I mean, not that things didn't get violent on her side. She set up a judge and murdered.
But that's after the march.
Okay. All right. But again, if it was my daughter, I can understand why, what Bennett is feeling here. He obviously... Sure. Yeah, it's going to be dangerous no matter what. Even if it wasn't violent, it would be dangerous. Yeah. Now, as for what he does when he contacts the judges, and I mean, that had to have been really tough. When you put yourself in the shoes of Bennett, what do you do? Do you actually say something, or do you let it go on? Because there's going to be something that's happening that she could possibly die, and it wasn't supposed to go that way. Go ahead.
Right. I mean, it's like the Towns Van Zandt song Poncho and Lefty, where Lefty turns in Poncho to the Federales and they kill him. And at one point in the song, it's like, so Poncho needs your prayers, it's true, but save a few for Lefty too. He just did what he had to do, and now he's growing old. Bennett did not have the strength to do that. Bennett wanted to make sure that nobody ever got hurt. And the thing was, Total War was going to hurt people, or the judges were going to hurt people, or they're both going to hurt people, or they're going to hurt each other. There was no way for people to not get hurt, and he wanted to find that way. And so he did what he thought was the best outcome, and now he has to live with that. He has to live with it.
That's right. Now, the good thing is that he obviously finds a way to honor her memory, which is when you look at the way that he does that, the fact that he put his own brain into her body, there's some pretty progressive themes. I understand this is coming from a Judge Dredd book, but there's some pretty progressive themes for 1990.
Well, but that's the thing. That's the sneaky thing about Judge Dredd. It's a progressive book from the start. Right. You're not supposed to think these things are good. It's satire. And so, it's very sneakily progressive. It's funny because if you go to the UK, I bet a lot of the people there who are into Judge Dredd, it probably reverses. 80% of the people who are here into Judge Dredd are like, Judge Dredd's great. I love him. Let's do that. Kill all the criminals. And 20% are closer to me who are like, this is a very interesting sociological thing that also you get to see somebody shoot lizard people sometimes. And I bet if you go to the UK, that polarity is probably reversed. 70-80% of the people get it as satire, and a minority are like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Sadly, that minority now runs all the governments and is militarizing the police as quickly as they can in the vein of Judge Dredd. But that's another story, But I do agree with you where you're like, she set up judges like me. I don't have a problem with that because they're fucking totalitarian, fascist pieces of trash who killed her baby, who killed all those people at the march. So, of course, you know what? Listen, you can have all the fun reaping you want, but at some point you are going to sow. And they were sowing. At the same time, you're like, well, what did these two judges have to do with it? I get that point of view from somebody else. I just think that fascists deserve whatever's coming to them, whatever they get, they asked for it. If you're going to push people around and somebody pushes you back, what the fuck you want me to do about it? What am I supposed to? Fuck you.
What I love about It's what I love about this story, though, is it being told, primarily from the point of view of Benny, who's watching this all go down, watching this woman that he loved, all this ferocity that she had, with all this drive, and the fact that he has to make this horrible decision to turn her in, and then, of course, it all backfires, and he watches it. It's tragic. It's very, very tragic.
And again, it didn't have to go down that way. They killed those people because they wanted to.
Right.
They tell Benny that he's like, you said you could have picked him up anytime. That it's funny because that's very similar to the Waco story. They could have picked David Koresh up any time. He left that compound a lot, went jogging and did stuff. They wanted to make a big show, and it backfired on him that time. And I'm not saying that's good. I don't, because David Koresh and his weirdos are just a different brand of fascist. I'm like, let them fight. But at the same time, what we wind up seeing happen again and again when governments have the monopoly of violence that we've allowed the state to have, they tend to want to use it as an example to convince other people to quell other resistance. That's what this is about, and that's always bad. It's always unjustified, because if the point of the state is to make sure that people live as well as best they can and things go as smoothly as they can, the state should not kill people to set an example. But here we are, the judge is just like, yeah, we did that on purpose. You're not the only one in show business, Benny.
Yeah. Man.
And you talked about those 2 points of view. There's a third point of view, and that's Judge Dredd. And from the start, and at the end, he tells you what a creep he is. And then you'll notice, even when he's not talking, he's watching them. He runs them when they're kids, when they're in high school. He's looking at them through a fucking binoculars when she's talking about how she's gonna, paper the streets because it's illegal to apparently post things now at this point. Judge Dredd's point of view is always there as well, that he was always a domineering, at least potential threat, if not actual threat. And the second he could be an actual threat, he did not hesitate to be so. Basically that's it. It starts very harsh and it ends very harsh. There are sequels to this where we see what happens to Beeny and eventually there's a child involved. And we see what happens to that child. I don't like them. I think they take a very wuss and soft way out of this instead of confronting the problems better. The creators would disagree, I'm sure. I'm a very hardline anarchist, so to me, it's probably more binary than it should be. But for me, I feel like it takes a very, very easy out instead of actually confronting these problems. At the same time, if they legitimately confronted the problems, the judges would be overthrown by sheer numbers alone, and I guess 2080 would shut down.
True.
Well, just to play devil's advocate, I will remind everyone that the judges did not evolve in a vacuum. The judges are a result of society collapsing, right? Through a variety of things. It's like, one of my favorite comic books of all time is V for Vendetta. In that, very similar to this, coming out both before and after, that is about how when things get bad, very bad, it's very easy for the populace to say, oh, okay, well, you can fix this, fix it. As long as I can wake up tomorrow, I don't really care what I have to give up. The judges are in many ways a cartoonish extrapolation of that, right? They have the law master, they have the lawgiver. They're called judges, but they're police officers, with the idea being that they can dispense justice immediately, which should be the most un-American thing you can imagine. But again, to a couple of Brits, this is the where we could go, or where we have gone, or where we will go. And I love that, because it's the ability to have someone point at us and say, well, do you guys even realize that, this is, for all the good that was done, this is easily where you could end up. So I think that when we say that Dredd is not someone to be emulated, I agree 100%. But I also would say that he's a cautionary tale just in the fact that he exists at all, and that's very important too, because this whole comic is about the idea that the judges run things, but they shouldn't. They should be tools of the state. They should be tools of the people and whatnot. So I think that's important to remember too. Benny and America and everyone else who's victimized and subjugated in this environment, they're the result of decisions and situations that could have never been made on their behalf, but were because of how bad things got. So, I always go back. I mentioned this when we did the Seven Super Sons or whatever it was called. But one of my favorite movies is The Seven Samurai, and that's all about how the people who are subjugated, the people who subjugate them in the society they live in, you're all connected, right? No one exists in a vacuum. It takes a village to raise a child. Everything is interconnected. It's the same thing in Judge Dredd. Like if a person is being horrible to someone else, whether it's their job, whether they see it's the only way to get up in the morning, or whether it's just what they choose to do because they think someone else is going to like them, it's still a decision they made. But once you realize that we're all in this together, things tend to get a little bit better. But Dredd is not about that. Dredd can't see that. Dredd thinks if I compromise in any way on even the smallest thing, this fragile, tenuous society we've been able to carve out in the wasteland is going to collapse in on itself. So Dredd does think he's doing the right thing. I don't think he is.
Of course he does. Of course he does. There are just very few fascists who think they're wrong. Like there's some grifters who know they're full of shit, you know, but yeah, they will all tell you the same thing. It's like in the Avengers movie when Loki's like, you've never met a man like me. And that guy's like, they're always been like you. Like these are very old and tired ideas that have never led to anything except ruin, no matter, what condition they sprang out of. So until we move past these old and tired ideas, I guess, we live in Mega City 1 and here we are.
I literally live in Mega City 1.
So do I.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You do. Yeah. You do. Actually, Jesse, you might too. I looked up. So again, I'm a Dredd novice. So I did look up the maps for Mega City 1. They are not set in stone. We may get parts of Ohio. So
I gotta look now. Let's take a look.
Mega City.
The most popular one is like Washington D.C. all the way over to like Pittsburgh to like Boston, like about there. Yeah. Some of them go as far south as Atlanta.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw one that went all the way down. I was very surprised by that.
I don't know the difference. It could be, because there's like wars and stuff in Judge Dredd. Like at one point they nuke the Soviet sit and Judge Dredd hits the button. He's like, yeah, no problem. Whatever. And different things happen. So some could have been canonical at one point, then weren't, or they could have been a reboot. Like, I don't know that much about it. I've read like the first 3 or 4 years of Judge Dredd and find it to be like really, fun. Really smart stuff. But yeah, you're right. These things didn't happen in a vacuum, and they won't unhappen in one either. And hopefully, Beeny is able to inspire a lot more people, because that's really it's a very dark and dour book. But at the end, he's like, you can't stop. You have to keep fighting for what he thinks is right, which is America. Judge Dredd is like, oh, you're never going to win. Well, I guess that's the eternal struggle, isn't it? I guess that's the way it's always been. And until one side completely eliminates the other, it's the way it'll always be. And I don't know. Either we're all going to die or one side's not going to eliminate the other, it seems, because no matter how much, like, we fought a whole war about this shit and there's still Nazis, and like, it's wild.
You need both, because you need these ideas to evolve in time with the other side presenting its case. I mean, that's kind of the problem here is, when things get bad and one side is able to become 99% of the problem, you get the judges and you get a population that doesn't know what to do with itself. And then once an equilibrium is reached, they're like, wait, why did we let you guys be in charge? And then they're going to rise up. And then, if they reach an equilibrium, great, maybe they'll be good. Maybe they'll figure out how to terraform the wastelands or whatever they're called. But most action movies, especially when they're set in America, they just tend to be like, well, no, you're fascist, you're bad, we're going to murder you, and then we're going to be left with some version of anarchy. And again, I go back to V for Vendetta, because that's the choice the main character places in the reader's hands of like, hey, I'm going to take away this government, but I am taking away the government. You may not like it, I may not like it, but I am going to take it away. Things are going to get pretty bad for a while. Is that what you want? And in that book, the reader is represented by Evie, and she decides, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to take it away from everyone. So it's kind of the same thing here. If you rounded up all the judges and threw them out into the wasteland, is that what you would want? Would you feel safer the next day? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, that's the thing, though. If you're talking about order versus freedom, yeah, that's something we always have to seek to balance. If you're talking about fascism versus anarchy, I vehemently disagree. Fascism's not a thought. It's a crime. It's just a straight up crime. It doesn't involve anything other than holding down, if not eradicating, certain groups of people so that other groups of people can do what? Be rich, right? Whatever. No, there's no room for, there's no real argument here. If we're going to treat it like what it is. Because if we look at where fascism always leads on a macro or micro societal level, it always leads to violence. It always leads to, oppression. It always leads to fear. Anarchy doesn't necessarily have to. It really depends on what people are willing to do. I've accepted that, we're not going to see anything like I want in my lifetime, but we could be a lot freer. I don't know that it has to cost us anything in order. I think that's a myth that's promulgated by people who get rich off the status quo.
I just meant that in Dredd's case, Dredd represents order. He is a fascist. I'm not going to argue that. But, his famous catchphrase of "I am the law is definable. I'm not saying that anyone should write a story where, a bunch of people who have more progressive ideas change the law and force Dredd to enforce that. But it would be interesting to see.
That story has been written when he's gone to Mega City
Sure.
too. It's funny.
Sure. Yeah. And again, I don't know that we've mentioned this a lot. We're having a pretty serious discussion, but Dredd is supposed to be hilarious, and it
Right.
is. It continues that long storied British tradition of them just taking the piss out of them, out of us, and it's funny. There's a
This
reason.
is actually odd in that it's not a funny Judge Dredd story.
Yeah.
Even the Batman stuff is funny.
Yeah. When he's screaming, "I am the law," and he's covered in badges and leather and eagle, it's martial law. It's them making fun of us, and it's great because they nailed it. They get us. They really do. They were their weird, wayward teenage son who swam across the Atlantic, and they completely understand us. So I think that's important. I think that's always been Dredd's strongest selling point, is that it has a criminal degree of self-awareness, and it's very good at that.
Yeah, I love the early issues for that. The satire is stands up to this day. It's very, very funny.
Yeah,
I don't disagree, and I'm not saying you're arguing in favor of fascism or whatever, but I'm just I find that to be the slipperiest slope in the history of mankind.
All I meant was that at some point someone gives power, and we have to understand why they did that. Make sure that those conditions don't exist again.
100% agree. Nazi Germany didn't happen in a vacuum. Fascist Spain didn't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
Italy.
Right.
No, you're right. We can trace these conditions back, and they usually can go back to good people capitulating for absolutely no reason that anyone can find, and then demonizing the people who actually decide to fight back. That sound familiar?
No.
You got a great discussion, by the way, guys. Fantastic.
Right. Everybody who's listening has a goddamn PhD now.
I'm over here trying to fucking figure out if I'm in the cursed lands. Because I'm looking at maps and I'm like, oh my, there is a
the cursed lands now.
Cursed Earth. So the way that this works is, looking at the map, at least this is what's on Wikipedia, there is a line that goes straight down from Lake Erie for just a little bit, and then all of a sudden, for some fucking reason, makes a direct turn right. And this is, I assume, the middle of Ohio, and then goes around where I would be. So I'm a fucking.
Because it includes Cleveland and Columbus and Pittsburgh, because there's no there's not much land or anything here. Now it's all cities, so it all would have had to have grown out of those three urban areas. No, I guess Youngstown would be between it to an extent, but those are the three primary ones where that angle happens, I think.
Fantastic. Here I am. Are the mutants part of the cursed Earth? What am I? Am I?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Well, enjoy.
Here's to you guys.
You might have made it though. There's probably a time where you could have immigrated. You'll probably be over there. You'll be you'll be over there listening to Beanie's records, being boy, this guy, what a
We did it, guys. This has been a great.
Because I was in Total War.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that. I mean, it just keeps getting darker on this podcast. I don't know if it could get much darker, other than the fact that we are about to turn out the lights and get out of here.
Well, I promise next time we get together, we'll be much more lighthearted, because I want to say this now. next time that we get together, finally, we're going to bring this together for Jesse Starcher, the best comic book of all time. The one that he has never, ever, ever wanted, to stop reading, Cyberforce.
That's right.
Cyberforce.
Every month I whip out 0 through 4.
0 through 4. You know who else does? The guy from the Carnage concert with the knife at Madison Square Garden. He fucking he's got that knife, right? He went and read Cyberforce 0 through 4 right before that. He was inspired. He's like, I can't be a cyborg, but I can have a knife.
He was inspired.
He was inspired.
Oh, my
goodness. Look at those lasers. Look at those sharp swords. Look at Ripclaw. I can't be Ripclaw. I can be One Claw.
I can be
One Claw, yes.
One Claw.
We are actually going to talk about Cyberforce 0 through 4 next time, which should be a lot of fun. I remember reading it, and I remember being like, boy, this looks great, but I don't understand anything. So it'll be fun to read again.
I cannot
Except
wait.
Number Zero. Number Zero makes sense because it's written by Walt Simonson.
I was going to say Walt Simonson's involved, so... Well, all right, Judge Dredd America is in the can. It's time to get out of here. Dean Compton, tell them about the Unspoken Decade.
All right, we're at unspokendecade.com. TheUnspokenDecade.com, covering 90s comics, semi-fans writing stuff. We're on the Facebook. I finally have my keyboard fixed, so where I spilled soda on it, so now I can post things again and not have to pull the E back up because I hit E and it's E. So now I posted some comics on the Facebook today and some on the Twitter, so I'll be more active on there now. I mean, I had a keyboard, but I was just too lazy to hook it up, guys. So lazy. Most of what I do with the mouse anyway, so what the fuck. So anyhow, but that's back. At Unspoken Decade on Twitter. We're doing things, having fun. It'll be more fun than this podcast, but probably less informative.
I'm sure there's a few Judge Dredd images that we can share that we
There are a few that we have shared a few.
Yes, that we enjoy.
Yeah. We're like Batman.
Oh, I wish I could remember that dude's name. He had a butthead meter. It was crazy. Headbutt meter. That's what it was, not butthead meter. His name might have actually been Butthead. You never know. So, the Source Material Comics podcast. Look, we talked about G.I. Joe Extreme. That landed as far as it'd be this week that we're talking. G.I. Joe Extreme. I threw some cuts in there. We opened it up with the intro from the cartoon. You can't get any better than that. And then I even threw a commercial in there, if I remember correctly, from What's It's Awesome. And then, you can hear me and Evan Bevins talking Snap Material, which is our Source Material special episodes for Marvel Snap, the mobile game. So if you enjoy playing that, you can check out some of the quick hits that we've done here recently, talking about the most recent season. And then the last Source Material that we just released, our 334th episode, where Mark Radulich and myself got together and talked The Fourth Man, which was a really interesting book. I think it was Mike Deodato Jr. was the artist. And when you look, I remember this was a great book where I was like, what a crazy concept. 2 warring car dealerships that result in a murder. How outlandish is that? And it turns out it's based on a true story. So it was a great book. That was finished up our crime noir discussion that Mark and I had. So check that out. That released, it was a while back. So anyway, I think that's it. Darry waits up there. Dean Compton's down there. I'm Jesse Starcher. We're out of here. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics, blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues Podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com and the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.